Chapter 771. While speaking, Ziauddin's figure disappeared in a flash, and the terrifying breath came towards David again. "I'm coming too." Seeing this, Ning Yu jumped up high and walked towards David. Ning Yu didn't want to make a move, since Ziauddin could kill David, he just happened to be relieved, but when Ziauddin said that the sword in David's hand was a precious sword, Ning Yu was tempted. If he kills David, he can take the sword into his own hands. He believes that Ziauddin will not go against him for a sword. After all, not everyone is like David and is not afraid of Tianluo Pavilion at all. Mr. Chen. Seeing the two attacking David together, Lin Tianhu and Chifeng rushed up first, even knowing they were dead. Then Xiaolan rushed up without the slightest hesitation, followed by Bai Xiaoshan and Bai Zhan's grandfather and grandson. Among them, the most powerful is Bai Xiaoshan, the strength of the 5th grade Grandmaster. But even with this strength, it is incomparable with Wuzong, it is a world of difference. "If you don't want to die, get out, everyone who stays here will die." Ziauddin roared when he saw that someone was actually helping David. Wuzong's anger was not a joke. The martial arts masters of the Martial Arts Alliance looked at each other, and in the end they all turned around and left quickly. At this moment, David's defeated image appears, and they will surely die if they stay. In the face of death, these people all ran away. Originally, they had nothing to do with David. The reason why they respected David as the leader of the Wu-Meng Alliance was that these people could profit from it. There is no need to praise David. Dozens of people dispersed in a hurry. In the end, only Wu Liuyi and Wu Xi were left, and Bajiquan Gao Yusheng stood on the spot with his 2 disciples. They didn't run, but they didn't have the courage to shoot. In front of such a battle, their strength is simply not enough. At this time, Lin Tianhu, Chifeng, and Xiaolan faced Ning Yu. Although they were 3-on-1, the 3 of them were not Ning Yu's opponents at all. It was just a face-to-face meeting, and the 3 of them were knocked out by Ning Yu. Blocking Ning Yu's figure, Bai Xiaoshan and Bai Zhantang's grandfather and grandson directly stopped Ziauddin. Facing Wuzong's strength, Bai's grandfather and grandson were like a man's arm, but even so, they still stood in front of him without hesitation. Ziauddin swung out his palm, and Bai Xiaoshan and Bai Zhantang all flew backwards and fell heavily to the ground. Ziauddin didn't kill him. After all, the other party was from the Bai family in Kyoto, so Ziauddin was somewhat afraid. "Dare to stop me, kill Washi!" Ziauddin roared angrily. David looked at the few people who were knocked to the ground in front of him, his eyes slowly turned red, and the flame of the dragon-slaying sword in his hand became more violent. "You all step back, you are not allowed to come forward to help," David said expressionlessly. "Mr. Chen." Lin Tianhu and Chifeng looked ugly, obviously injured, but they didn't want to retreat. "Go back." David raised the volume, with an unmistakable voice in his voice. Lin Tianhu and Chifeng could only support each other and retreat. Xiaolan and Bai's grandfather and grandson all looked at David, and finally sighed helplessly and retreated. Even if they fought for their lives, they wouldn't be able to help David. After all, the difference in strength was too great. At this moment, Ning Yu saw David walking forward again with the dragon-slaying sword in his hand, and a cold light flashed in his eyes, and a suffocating aura hit him in an instant, and then the suffocating aura instantly turned into a shackle, wrapping around David's feet. And Ning Yu's figure also moved along with it, and with lightning speed, he directly flashed in front of David, stretched out his hand and grabbed towards David's dragon-slaying sword. Chapter 772. But just when David was about to fight back, he found that Ning Yu's figure suddenly flew backwards. After Ning Yu landed, he stumbled and almost fell to the ground. "Master Xiaoman, what do you mean?" After Ning Yu landed, he frowned and asked Ziauddin. "This kid's life can only be taken by me. You can just watch it from the side. The revenge of killing the son is unbearable. Are you afraid that I can't kill him alone?" Ziauddin actually saw Ningyu's careful thinking long ago, so he stopped Ningyu. Although Ningyu was angry, he didn't dare to say anything, and could only take a few steps back angrily. "Boy, I'm going to tear you to pieces." After Ziauddin finished speaking, a burst of breath rose from his body, and the terrifying breath pressed on David's body, making David a little breathless. Whether it can kill me is still unknown. David raised the dragon-slaying sword. At this moment, the dragon-slaying sword was in David's hand, making a constant buzzing sound, which seemed to cheer for David. Ziauddin's eyes narrowed slightly, and he focused his attention on the dragon-slaying sword. It could be seen that he showed considerable interest in this sword. David saw that Ziauddin liked this dragon-slaying sword very much, and suddenly he had a plan, and the momentum of his body was withdrawn, and the whole person was almost crushed by Ziauddin's breath. David was very decadent at the moment, as if he couldn't gather his energy, he was fighting with Ziauddin. Seeing that David's breath was instantly sluggish, Ziauddin raised the corner of his mouth. Martial arts is about fighting steadily and laying a solid foundation. I don't know what exercises you use to make you reach the strength of a great master at a young age, but in the end it's just a fake. Now I kill you, is it still unknown? David's face was ugly, he wore rough clothes, and looked at Ziauddin with a pleading look in his eyes. "I will give you the dragon-slaying sword in my hand, you will kill me, if you don't agree, it's a big deal, I will follow. The dragon-slaying sword will be destroyed together, this is an ancient sword." David planned to use the dragon-slaying sword in his hand to save his life. Ziauddin did not expect that David would make such a request, and was slightly taken aback. And Lin Tianhu and the others were also stunned. "What's wrong with Mr. Chen? Is it stupid? This is the revenge of murdering his son. Even if he gave the sword to that Ziauddin, how could he let Mr. Chen go?" Lin Tianhu said with a puzzled face. "Mr. Chen behaved very strangely today, it's not like his style." Qi Feng also looked at him with a dazed expression, not understanding what David was doing. Bai Ziashan did not speak, but his eyes narrowed slightly, looking at everything in front of him. Although he has not been in contact with David for a long time, he can be sure that David is definitely not a person who is greedy for life and fears death. The reason why David does this must be there is a reason. At this moment, Ziauddin was stunned for a moment, and looked at David. He originally thought that David was a man, but he didn't expect that in the face of life and death, he was also a coward. However, in order to kill his son, how could Ziauddin let David go? But in order to get the dragon-slaying sword first, Ziauddin nodded and said, "If you can give me this sword, I can spare your life, but the death penalty can be avoided, but the living crime cannot escape. You must go up the mountain to guard my son's tomb for 3 years." Ziauddin didn't dare to agree too happily, he was afraid that David would become suspicious. "Okay, as long as you don't kill me, let alone guard the tomb for 3 years, even 10 years. After David finished speaking, he raised his hand and threw the dragon-slaying sword to Ziauddin. Ziauddin was enveloped in energy before reaching out to take the dragon-slaying sword. He was afraid that David would cheat. When the dragon-slaying sword was in his hand, Ziauddin could feel the slightest breath on the sword, and when his mind moved, the dragon-slaying sword hummed along with it. Chapter 773. Ha ha ha, good sword, really good sword. Looking at the dragon-slaying sword in his hand, Ziauddin burst out laughing. He did not expect that the dragon-slaying sword would resonate with the user. Ningyu on the side saw this, with envy in his eyes. In this way, this dragon-slaying sword is much better than his evil punishing sword. "Now that I give you the sword, can you stop killing me?" David asked Ziauddin, who was laughing. "Don't kill you." Ziauddin smiled coldly, "If you don't kill you, how can you be worthy of my son's spirit in the sky? Go underground and guard my son's tomb." After Ziauddin finished speaking, he waved the dragon-slaying sword in his hand, and a large amount of energy was applied to the dragon-slaying sword, and a dark brown flame began to rise from the dragon-slaying sword. It turns out that you are also an evil cultivator, no wonder you don't believe your words. David watched Ziauddin raise the dragon-slaying sword, not only did not hide, but his face was calm. Ziauddin did not speak, but swung the dragon-slaying sword in his hand. The terrifying sword energy seemed to engulf David. But when Ziauddin swung the dragon-slaying sword towards David, he suddenly discovered that the dragon-slaying sword was out of his control, and the energy in his body was constantly draining, all of which was sucked by the dragon-slaying sword. Ziauddin's face changed greatly, and he wanted to throw the dragon-slaying sword out, but found that the dragon-slaying sword seemed to stick to his hand. The energy in his dantian was continuously sucked away by the dragon-slaying sword. Ziauddin squinted his eyes and suddenly burst out with energy in his palm, and finally knocked the dragon-slaying sword into the air. The dragon-slaying sword flew into the air, followed by a roundabout, ruthlessly making a wound on Ziauddin's left arm, and then flew back to David's hand. David held the dragon-slaying sword. At this moment, all the energy on the dragon-slaying sword entered David's body and added to David's dantian. This dragon-slaying sword has long been a part of David's body, just like David's hands and feet. Just saw that Ziauddin likes this dragon-slaying sword, and David has a plan. As long as Ziauddin holds the dragon-slaying sword, David can use the condensing heart technique to absorb the energy in Ziauddin's body. Although he was shocked by Ziauddin in the end, David's strength recovered a lot, but Ziauddin not only lost a lot of energy, but even injured his left arm. "Little beast, if I don't kill you today, I won't be named Xia." Ziauddin looked at the wound on his arm, his whole body was furious, he saw a dark brown breath rising from his body, and the wound on his arm healed at the speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, around David and Ziauddin, a large black net with a radius of over 100 meters enveloped them. This was Ziauddin to prevent David from escaping. Seeing that Ziauddin's body was able to recover quickly, David's complexion couldn't help changing. It seemed that this guy's body was stronger than his own. Afterwards, a layer of black mist appeared on Ziauddin's body, as if he was wearing a layer of armor, and then he slapped David with his palm. David raised his hand and waved the dragon-slaying sword. The powerful sword energy of the dragon-slaying sword slashed at Ziauddin's body, making a burst of noises. This sword could not break through Ziauddin's defense. However, Ziauddin did not slow down, and slapped David's body with a fierce palm, and David's body flew out and fell to the ground. David only felt his internal organs tumbling for a while, but in the end he held back and slowly stood up. Although this palm shook David's internal organs constantly rolling, but his body did not suffer any damage. After all, David's powerful body was comparable to a copper wall. Seeing that David actually stood up, and there was no scar on his body, not even a palm print, Ziauddin was slightly taken aback. Chapter 774. I didn't expect your body to be so strong. After Ziauddin finished speaking, he grabbed it casually, and a giant sword condensed with black energy appeared in his hand. Cut! Ziauddin didn't move, but the giant sword condensed in his hand began to grow bigger and slashed towards David. David's expression changed, and he also held the dragon-slaying sword, and suddenly picked it up. The two swords collided fiercely. Rumbling! There were bursts of violent explosions, and Ziauddin's sword slammed into David's shoulder. David's body was like the top of Mount Tai, and half of his body fell into the ground in an instant. Looking at David's shoulders, at this moment, he had eaten the body-quenching pill, and his body was comparable to a copper wall, but there was still a deep wound. The flesh at the wound turned out, and bright red blood flowed out. The scene was terrible. Seeing that David was injured, Xiao Lan let out a burst of exclamation, and the others watched nervously. Although they were very anxious, they couldn't do anything. They wanted to help, but they were afraid that even the big net that Ziauddin had set up would not be able to break. David looked at his wound, blood was dripping continuously. Tick-tock, Tick-tock. David could not feel the pain, but the red blood seemed to arouse David's fighting spirit. And before that drop of blood fell to the ground, it was all sucked up by the dragon-slaying sword. David's blood touched the dragon-slaying sword, and the flames that had been extinguished on the dragon-slaying sword rose up instantly as if it had been splashed with gasoline. The scorching flames reflected David's resolute face. Although he was injured, there was no trace of panic in David's eyes. Fire tornado! David shouted angrily, his body suddenly rose from the ground, and the dragon-slaying sword in his hand was drawn in the air. Roar! In mid-air, a red fire dragon appeared, and the fire dragon let out a long roar, heading towards Ziahadun. Ziahadun snorted coldly, the black giant sword in his hand dissipated instantly, turned into a shield, and blocked it in the air. The fire dragon hit the shield and disappeared in an instant, and Ziahadun jumped up and slammed down on David. Boom! David's body was knocked flying, and then he hit the ground heavily, smashing a big hole on the ground. David only felt that his whole body was sore, and the spiritual power in his dantian was almost empty. David lay on the ground and looked at the blue sky. Did he just die like this? David unconsciously saw the figures of his parents and Sonia. No, I can't die, I haven't found my biological parents, I still don't know my background, I have to go to Wuming Island. David gritted his teeth and got up from the ground with difficulty. Seeing that David was getting scared, Ziahadun couldn't help but show some admiration in his eyes. It was already like this. David was not dead yet, and he still had the will to get up. You kill yourself, in front of me, you have no chance of winning. Ziahadun said coldly. After several fights, Ziahadun knew that David's energy had been empty for a long time, and he had no ability to fight against him at all. David gritted his teeth, propped up the ground with the dragon-slaying sword, and stared at Ziahadun. He would not commit suicide. Buzzing! There was a humming sound, and the spiritual power in the dragon-slaying sword was continuously transported into David's body. David was stunned for a moment, and he was overjoyed. He didn't expect that the dragon-slaying sword would send spiritual power to him. When he was cultivating in Pine Bay, almost all the spiritual energy of a truckload of spiritual stones was sucked away by the dragon-slaying sword. David still complained at the time, but he did not want to use his spiritual energy at this critical moment. Sent to David. You still want to fight with me? Ziahadun said gloomily when he saw that David did not commit suicide. David did not speak, but greedily absorbed the spiritual power in the dragon-slaying sword. Chapter 775. Cut. Suddenly, David roared, and then the breath in his body rose, the flames on the dragon-slaying sword disappeared, replaced by golden rays of light. Illuminated by the golden light, the large black-brown net that originally shrouded the top of the head disappeared in an instant, as if avoiding the golden light. David slashed out with one sword, the sword energy surged, and countless sword lights enveloped Ziahadun. Boom! Afterwards, the swordsmen gathered together and fell towards Ziahadun. Ziahadun frowned slightly. The golden light just now caused a lingering fear in his heart, and the black energy wrapped around his body seemed to be afraid of the golden light, and it dissipated a lot. Armor of darkness! Ziahadun let out an angry roar, and a dark brown energy rose up behind him again, and then quickly wrapped his body. Click! At this moment, David's sword beam had arrived, and it slashed hard on Ziahadun's body. But at the moment of the touch, the sword light instantly disintegrated and disappeared, and Ziahadun's figure just swayed, and he was not hurt. David supported the ground with his sword. The sword just now used up almost all his spiritual power. Although the dragon-slaying sword in his hand was buzzing all the time, it seemed to be full of fighting intent, but David was unable to fight any more. David's face was pale, as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. Boy, this time I see if you still have the ability to block my blow. After Ziahadun finished speaking, he slowly raised his hand, an invisible breath condensed in Ziauddin's hand, and then suddenly waved, pressing towards David. David was no longer able to resist Ziauddin's blow, even if he had a strong body, but this time David knew that even if he didn't die, he would be seriously injured. At this time, David even felt the smell of death, a feeling of suffocation that made him breathless. David! Suddenly, there was a coquettish shout from behind, and then Xiaolan's figure stood in front of David. Bang! Xiaolan was hit hard, and the whole person flew out in an instant. When David saw this, he directly caught Xiaolan, who was knocked into the air. Seeing Xiaolan's face ashen, bleeding from her nose and mouth, David's eyes were full of anger. You all blame me, I shouldn't let you let go of Ning Yu's. Xiaolan was so angry that she looked at David with a guilty face. Stop talking, stop talking. David hurriedly pressed Xiaolan's wrist and began to check Xiaolan's injury. Xiaolan was seriously injured, and almost all her internal organs were severely injured. However, David's spiritual power is now exhausted, and there is no way to treat Xiaolan at all. Xiaolan, don't sleep, don't sleep. Seeing Xiaolan's eyes slowly closing, David hurriedly shouted. But no matter how David shouted, Xiaolan's eyes finally closed slowly. Looking at Xiaolan, who had lost her breath, David's body was trembling slightly. This was the first person to die for him, and the anger in David's heart burned. What? David raised his head and roared, his eyes turning red. And David's roar, in the ears of others, is not a human shout, but a dragon's roar, like a dragon's roar. This sound can be heard clearly in the entire 10 li radius. Lin Tianhu and the others at the scene hurriedly covered their ears with their hands, showing great pain. Even that Xiauddin was startled by this sound, and his body retreated again and again. David slowly put Xiaolan on the ground, got up and looked at Xiauddin in front of him. In front of David's chest, a red light seemed to shine from David's body. David's body was slowly changing, becoming transparent, and the beating of his bright red heart could be clearly seen. This. Mr. Chen, what's the matter? Seeing the change in David, Lin Tianhu and the others were all stunned. Chapter 776. Xiauddin's eyes widened when he saw the change in David's body. He had never seen such a vision before. Buzzing. Suddenly there was a buzzing sound, and the Shenengding in David's arms actually flew out by itself, and then it began to grow, turning into a bronze tripod that was as tall as a person. And there seems to be something burning in the copper cauldron, and white mist is constantly emerging. David's body is quickly absorbing these white mists. These are not fog, but spiritual energy. Spiritual energy is emitting from the copper cauldron. At that time, when David got the Shenengding, he didn't detect a trace of spiritual energy on it, but at this moment, a large amount of spiritual energy was bursting out of the Shenengding, and these auras were quickly absorbed by David. This Sheneng cauldron is an ancient artifact. I didn't know how many elixir and magic medicines came from this Sheneng cauldron. Now it has aura, which is not surprising. Looking at the scene in front of him, Xiauddin frowned tightly. He didn't expect David to have a lot of treasures in his hands. Young Master Ning, you and I cooperated to kill David together. When the time comes, you can choose one of the 2 treasures. Xiauddin looked at Ning Yu and said. After the fight just now, Xiauddin's energy was also consumed a lot. He originally thought that David would die, but he didn't want such a change. He really couldn't figure out what treasures David still had. Don't run out of energy for a while, and David was still standing in front of him alive. So Xiauddin plans to join forces with Ning Yu to kill David together, so as not to have too many night dreams. No problem. After Ning Yu finished speaking, with a wave of the Xie sword in his hand, the evil spirits turned into shackles, directly locking David. Xiauddin also took the opportunity to wave his hands and recast a large black-brown net, covering several people. He wanted to prevent David from escaping. David was bound, but he did not struggle or break free, but greedily absorbed the spiritual energy that emerged from the Sheneng Ding. The dragon-slaying sword in David's hand was also greedily absorbing spiritual energy, and the sword body kept buzzing. Take your life. Ning Yu saw that David was restrained by himself and did not struggle, so he took the sword of killing evil, jumped up, and stabbed David with a sword. David didn't seem to see Ning Yu's attack. The condensation art was running fast, and the aura in his dantian was recovering quickly. David's body began to recover slowly, and a faint golden light could still be seen on his bare skin. Ding! Ning Yu stabbed David's chest with a sword, but he made a crisp sound, as if he was stabbed on an iron plate. Ning Yu was stunned for a moment, and then the strength in his hand increased a bit. Puff! I saw the Zuxi sword pierced David's skin, and drops of blood flowed out along the Zuxi sword. Ha ha ha! No matter how powerful the body is, it will not be pierced by me the same way. Seeing that David was injured, Ning Yu began to laugh. At this moment, David was restrained, and there was no chance to fight back, so Ning Yu also relaxed his vigilance and planned to increase his strength. Shoo! Just when Ning Yu was about to increase his strength and pierce David's sword, a cold light flashed in front of him. Ning Yu was stunned for a moment, looked down, and found that his hand holding the sword of punishment had been cut off from the wrist. Blood was pouring out. What? A few seconds later, the intense pain reached Ning Yu's brain, and Ning Yu screamed in pain. David was bound, but the dragon-slaying sword had long since merged with David, making the man and the sword one. David could completely control the dragon-slaying sword with his mind and cut off Ning Yu's wrist. Chapter 777. Xiahou, who was on the side, saw Ning Yu's hand cut off. His face changed. He knew that if he dragged it down, maybe David really couldn't be killed. Thinking of this, Xiahou's body disappeared from the place in an instant, and then a figure came to David. David was startled. He wanted to break free from the shackles, but was slapped on the chest by Xiahou. David's body flew out, and in mid-air, David broke the shackles and fell to the ground. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted out, but David couldn't suppress it this time. Looking at his chest again, there are 5 clearly visible fingerprints, and the chest is also sunken. He's so tenacious. Xiahou saw that David was not dead, so he raised his palm again, and jumped up, this time slapped David's head. But at this moment, the big net that was shrouded all around suddenly disappeared, and Xiahou's body seemed to have hit something and was bounced back by a huge force. Who? Xiahou was shocked. To know that someone who can force himself back without seeing them is definitely a master. Sect Master Xia, give the old man a face, take your people away. At this time, an old man walked slowly with a young man. The old man looked like a fairy. It was the elder Su Chongsheng of Medicine God Valley, and the young man following him was Yu Dong. Xiahou's eyes narrowed. Who are you? Why should I sell your face? Xiahou did not know the old man in front of him. This old man is the great elder of Yaishan Valley, Su Chongsheng, and I hope that the Xia clan master can sell his face. Su Chongsheng said slowly. When Xiahou heard the 3 words Yaishengu, his expression suddenly changed. Elder Su, this guy killed my son, and the revenge for killing my son is undeniable. Why do you want to help him? Xiahou asked, but obviously his tone softened a lot. Little brother Chen is a distinguished guest of my Medicine God Valley, of course I want to help. The master of Xiamen is the master of Tian Yumen, but his son practices sorcery, which has harmed many girls. As a father, you will not know? Brother Chen killed your son, and it is considered to be killing the people. Su Chongsheng said lightly. It seemed that he also knew about Xia Chao's practice of sorcery. You, Xiahou's face turned red and white, looking at David in front of him, his eyes were full of anger. Today I must kill him to avenge my son. When I kill him, I will give medicine to Shengu. Send a generous gift to make amends. After Ziauddin finished speaking, he suddenly waved a force towards David, and the energy roared. Seeing that David was about to die, how could Ziauddin give up so easily? When Su Chongsheng saw that Ziauddin dared to do something in front of him, his face instantly turned cold. You are planning to be my enemy in Yaoshengu. After Su Chongsheng finished speaking, he waved his hand, and an invisible breath wrapped David, and Ziauddin's energy instantly dissipated without a trace after touching Su Changshen's breath. Ziauddin gritted his teeth. Arrangement. With an order, the men who came behind Ziauddin with machetes in their hands suddenly formed a battle. Elder Su, I will kill this David today. If you insist on blocking it, then fight to the death. Ziauddin seemed determined to kill David. Tian Meng, Su Chongsheng snorted coldly, don't say that your energy is almost exhausted in a battle now, even if you were in your prime, killing you would be like crushing an ant. After he finished speaking, Su Chongsheng waved his sleeve robe, and suddenly there was a gust of wind, and a turbulent momentum swept towards Ziauddin and the others. Ziauddin suddenly put his foot on the ground and held it firmly, and his subordinates had long been knocked out. The momentum dissipated, Ziauddin's face was extremely ugly, and a mouthful of blood spurted out. Chapter 778. Let's go, if you're persistent, I won't show mercy. Su Chongsheng looked at Ziauddin and said lightly. Ziauddin glared at David, and finally gritted his teeth, David, you are lucky today, I will kill you sooner or later. After Ziauddin finished speaking, he turned his head and led people away. Seeing this, Ning Yu, who had broken his hand, was so frightened that he hurriedly followed Ziauddin and prepared to leave. You don't want to leave. Seeing that Ning Yu wanted to leave, David jumped up, blocking Ning Yu's way. David, what are you going to do? Ning Yu was trembling with fright. Now that he has broken one hand, he is no longer David's opponent. Kill you, David's eyes were cold. If this guy hadn't recruited Ziauddin, Xiaolan wouldn't have died, it was all caused by this guy. Seeing David's murderous look, Ning Yu hurriedly said to Ziauddin, Sect Master Xia, please take me with you. At this moment, Ning Yu could only pray that Ziauddin could take him with him. It's a pity that Ziauddin didn't even look back and left. Seeing Ziauddin gone, Ning Yu was in despair and could only beg David, please let me go, I can give you anything you want, but our Tianluo pavilion has a lot of treasures. David stared at Ning Yu with murderous expression, but did not speak, but waved the dragon-slaying sword in his hand. Ning Yu's head was instantly thrown high, and finally fell to the ground, and Gululu rolled out a long way. David put away the dragon-slaying sword and walked to Su Chongsheng, thank you Elder Su for helping me. You're welcome, it's just an effort, Su Chongsheng smiled lightly, and then his eyes fell on the Sheneng cauldron not far away. Brother Chen, is this copper cauldron yours? Oh, it was given by a friend, David said. A spiritual force penetrated into the Sheneng Ding, and the Sheneng Ding returned to the size of a palm and returned to David's arms. David didn't want Su Chongsheng to know that this was the Sheneng Ding. After all, the Sheneng Ding was an ancient artifact, or an alchemy weapon. If Su Chongsheng found out, what would he do if he had bad thoughts? Although Su Chongsheng saved David, under the huge temptation, people's hearts would always change, and David had to be careful. Putting away the Sheneng Ding, David looked at Xiaolan lying on the ground, his eyes moistened instantly. Whether he likes Xiaolan or not, whether the two have feelings for each other, but Xiaolan died because of saving him after all, and David's heart hurts. Walking slowly to Xiaolan's side, David squatted down and hugged Xiaolan. He planned to bury Xiaolan. Brother Chen, wait a minute, Su Chongsheng shouted, and then walked to David. After looking at Xiaolan's situation, she took out a pill from her arms and stuffed it into Xiaolan's mouth. Brother Chen, your friend is not dead, but it's not far from death. I gave her a life-sustaining pill, hoping to arrive at Yaoshin Valley in time, and when she arrives at Yaoshin Valley, she will be saved. Su Chongsheng said to David. What? Xiaolan isn't dead. David was stunned for a moment, and then a burst of spiritual power was injected into Xiaolan's body. Soon, David found that Xiaolan was indeed not dead, and her heart was still beating weakly. David broke out in a cold sweat. If it wasn't for Su Chongsheng, he would have buried Xiaolan himself. When he checked Xiaolan just now, the spiritual energy in his body was exhausted, and he did not check carefully, which almost made a big mistake. Elder Su, it is your duty to lead the way. After David finished speaking, he immediately said to Lin Tianhu, Lin Tianhu, you drive, we will go to Yaoshan Valley immediately. Brother Chen, Yaoshengu doesn't allow outsiders to come and go at will, you should explain a few words, take my car and go. Su Chongsheng explained. David nodded and told Lin Tianhu and the others to go back to Horindal. After seeing Sonia and the others, he would tell Sonia his whereabouts to avoid her worrying. After explaining, David got into Su Changshen's car with Xiaolan in his arms, and Yudong drove quickly towards Yaoshan Valley. Chapter 779 Southwest Tianluo Pavilion. After Xiahedun left Jiangnan, he went directly to Tianluo Pavilion. Since David was protected by Yaoshengu, it was difficult for him to compete with Yaoshengu by relying on his strength in Tianwu men. In this way, he would have no way to kill David. His son got revenge, so he came to Tianluo Pavilion and wanted to join forces with Tianluo Pavilion to kill David. Ni Sidao, the pavilion master of Tianluo Pavilion, heard the news that his most proud disciple was killed by David. His anger continued to rise. This was his most proud disciple. Ni Sidao had no children and no daughters. He taught it to Ning Yu, and even gave Ning Yu the sword of punishment, so that Ning Yu could take over Tianluo Pavilion in the future. But now that Ning Yu was killed, all Ni Sidao's efforts were wasted, which made Ni Sidao's heart tremble. Tianluo Pavilion is also well known in the southwest. No one does not know the reputation of Tianluo Pavilion, but now Ni Sidao's most proud disciple has been killed. It's like a bomb exploded in the entire southwest. On Ni Sidao's body, they all wanted to see what Ni Sidao would do. David, even if you escape to the ends of the earth, I will definitely tear you to pieces. Ni Sidao was full of anger, and smashed the table in front of him with one palm. The surrounding Tianluo Pavilion disciples were also filled with righteous indignation. Throughout the southwest, Tianluo Pavilion was used to being arrogant and had never been bullied like this. Seeing Ni Sidao's full body of anger, Xiahedun smiled in his heart, and then said, Gate Master Ni, it's not difficult to kill David, although that kid has some skills and beheaded Qin Xiaolan, but if I kill him, it's as easy as the palm of your hand, not to mention Pavilion Master Ni shot. But now that kid has been taken away by the people of Yaoshan Valley, it is estimated that he has gone to hide in Yaoshan Valley. We want to kill him now, it is difficult. So what if he hides in Medicine God Valley, kills people to pay for his life and debts? Even if he hides in Medicine God Valley, I will definitely kill him. Ni Sidao's eyes were full of anger, and at this moment, he didn't care about the Medicine God Valley or the Medicine God Valley. Master Ni, that David killed my son, and now he killed your most proud disciple. My Tianwu man is willing to join you in Tianluo Pavilion to kill Yaoshengu and take David's life. Xiahedun said excitedly. Now that the two have joined forces, they can fight with the Yaoshengu. He doesn't believe in the Yaoshengu. He will fight with them for the sake of a David. Okay, we can't be too late, you go to prepare immediately. I'm also gathering some people from other sects to find the dignitaries in the Medicine God Valley. Ni Sidao nodded. Ni Sidao knew that Yaoshengu was not a soft persimmon, so he had to arrange more people to put pressure on Yaoshengu. Xiahedun nodded, and hurriedly left Tianluo Pavilion to prepare staff. At this moment, David and the others have arrived at the foot of a big mountain. If you want to go to Yaoshan Valley, you can only take this rugged mountain road, and there are some mountains and forests around this road. among which there are many beasts and poisonous insects, and there will be poisonous miasmas from time to time. Appeared, so ordinary people rarely come here. After getting out of the car, Yudong parked the car aside and took out a black hood. Mr. Chen, according to our Yaishan Valley's rules, outsiders must cover their eyes when entering Yaishan Valley. Yudong politely followed David and said. David hugged Xiaolan and nodded slightly. Since people have this rule, David can't help but follow it. In fact, this headgear is useless to David at all. Now David only needs to emit a little consciousness to detect the distance of dozens of meters around, and he can't see it with his eyes at all. Chapter 780. Just when Yudong was about to put a hood on David, Su Chongsheng reached out and stopped him. You don't need to wear it. Brother Chen is not an outsider. After knowing the way, Brother Chen can come here often. Su Changshen's words were very close, which warmed David's heart. Seeing that Su Chongsheng had said so, Yudong put away the hood. A few people walked towards the mountain, surrounded by towering trees. There was only a sheep intestine path in the middle of the trees, but the sheep intestine path was very bright, and it was obvious that many people walked through it. Although the road is rough, for David and the others, it is nothing at all, but for ordinary people, it is insurmountable here. After walking for a full day and night, Su Chongsheng gave Xiaolan another life-sustaining pill, while David continued to send spiritual power to Xiaolan to maintain Xiaolan's life. Brother Chen, Medicine God Valley is here. Su Chongsheng pointed and said. David looked at it and found that the front was just foggy, and he couldn't see anything at all. However, when David's consciousness dissipated, he immediately realized that there was indeed a Taniguchi in front, and there were 4 people standing guard at Taniguchi. Guard. This kind of place, even if no one is guarding it, if there is no people in Yaishan Valley to lead the way, I am afraid that it will not be found, just like a paradise. Sure enough, it's a good place, but this fog is a bit redundant. David said, with a flick of his finger, a spiritual force instantly hit a large stone on the side. Suddenly the stone flashed 3 times, and the fog in front of him dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye, and finally disappeared without a trace. The Taniguchi of Medicine God Valley was revealed. After seeing Su Chongsheng, the 4 people standing guard at the entrance hurriedly threw them over and knelt down on one knee, welcome the first elder back to the valley. It's true that Su Chongsheng didn't look at the 4 people at the moment, but looked at David in surprise. Brother Chen, how do you know where our Yaishengu formation eye is? Su Chongsheng asked in surprise. The lowest level psychedelic formation is arranged here. As long as you find the eye of the formation, this formation can be easily broken. There is no difficulty. David said lightly. For David, this lowest level formation is really a pediatrics. Although David said it was easy, but in Su Changshen's view, he felt very incredible. David's strength is not bad, he can make alchemy, and now he can understand the formation method. This is simply a wizard. This simple formation was created by me at the beginning of Yaishengu's establishment. Those of us only know how to turn it on and off, but we don't understand the mystery of these formations. It seems that I will follow Brother Chen more in the future. Learned. What Su Chongsheng said was very sincere, without the slightest pretense. Elder Su is very polite. David felt a little flattered. After all, with such a strength as Su Chongsheng, many people were arrogant. How could they say such a thing? The 4 disciples of Yaishengu all glanced at David in surprise. They couldn't believe that their great elder was so polite to a young hairy boy. Although they were puzzled, no one dared to say anything. They were watching the gate in Yaishengu. They were not even qualified to talk to Su Chongsheng, let alone Su Chongsheng. Respectfully. Elder, Mr. Chen, we've traveled so long, let's go into the valley to talk. Yudong said. Yes, Xianjing, I will gather other people to discuss together and see how to heal this girl's injury. Su Chongsheng nodded hastily. David hugged Xiaolan and walked into the Medicine God Valley with Su Chongsheng and Yu Dong.